Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the Commerce Connect Introduction and Understanding video series. In this video, we'll be looking at two of the common areas where we usually have real-time calls to an external e-commerce system, and that is namely pricing and inventory. And the reason why pricing and inventory are not synced into the Sitecore repository, unlike the product data in our NOP Commerce example, is because generally speaking, pricing and inventory are extremely volatile. So where a product information and characteristics don't change on a regular basis, pricing data can change on a daily or weekly basis, and certainly inventory changes in real time. As you sell a product, it may no longer be available, and hence you need to query that information, and that is why the pipelines generally are done to be configured and work in real time. So first we'll look at price, and it's important to note with the model in the price, there's a couple things which may or may not apply to your e-commerce system, but are in the model anyways. And one of these is price type, and this typically can be extended to include things like membership, regionalized pricing, things like that. And so, interestingly enough, in the case of our NOP Commerce example, the model is expecting a price type, but NOP Commerce itself, out of the box, doesn't have anything other than the list price. And so we're actually sort of hard coding that list value into the model and the API calls that we're making to NOP Commerce. Let's take a look at how price works on the page. So I have this product here, the Asus laptop. It's $2,600. And from NOP Commerce, if I go into NOP Commerce and go to the catalog and choose to manage those products, I eventually get to the product page here, at which point I can see that value. It's a $2,600 laptop. And I can change this here to $2,500 and hit save. Now, the next time somebody visits that page on the Sitecore site, you'll see that that price is reflected immediately. I didn't have to do product synchronization. I didn't have to do a publish out to the web database. All of these calls are being made in real time. So let's see how this actually works on the back end. If we take a look at our show config again, we'll see here that we have a pipeline for get product prices. And in particular, there's a processor that's out of the box on the Sitecore side for get product prices. This actually doesn't really do anything. There's nothing that Sitecore needs to pull on its side that could theoretically be removed. It's simply a placeholder. And what we really have here is our NOP Commerce get product prices. And what that is doing is that is actually making the call to that NOP Commerce web service. And this is in our config file that comes along with our NOP Commerce installation on the Sitecore side. Okay, so if we look here now at our pipeline within our NOP Commerce connector within Sitecore, I'm going to look at the get product prices pipeline. This is a pipeline for obtaining a single price for a single product. You can see here there's also a bulk prices pipeline as well. So looking here, basically our pipeline inherits from the NOP processor, which in turn inherits from the Sitecore pipelines. And what we're doing here is basically saying, anytime we get a product request, if we don't have a price type, then make it the list price. And so those requests coming in generally are expecting a number of things: product ID, price type, and a currency code. So normally it's to get that product, and the list price type is basically just the default. So this would be if you're looking for different currencies or the price of a product in a different currency, you would pass that. If you were looking for the price of a product for members only, for example, you would pass that. And the list and the price type is really just something that can be extended. So in our case here, our standard implementation uses list. And similarly on the NOP Commerce side, so if I look at the actual WSDL for this, we're basically calling and passing the product ID and passing the price type. And NOP Commerce, the connector, the plugin on the NOP Commerce side, is simply taking list as a string value and returning that price. And so that's really the implementation. This pipeline is in turn just calling the service, and the service is basically just making a call to the WSDL, which is the service that we created on the NOP Commerce side. To catch that request, it passes the price back to Sitecore, and we see that displayed. So the only thing that to really point out, we can see here, we're not actually requesting the currency code from NOP Commerce and from the service. It doesn't have it. Presumably this was just for simplicity's sake in the implementation on the NOP Commerce side. The implementation was just handling one currency, that is US dollars, and therefore I guess it was felt from the implementation point of view that you didn't need to implement that. But obviously if you did, you would be extending the plugin on the NOP Commerce side to request and in turn return a price in that currency. But in this case here, we're just simply using US dollars. And so that's really it for the pipeline and how that works. So if we look back here at the price model and what was implemented in the NOP Commerce examples, what you can retrieve from the API is basically the amount, the currency code, description, and a price type. And that price type is often something that can be extended or is necessary to be extended for dealing with things like discounts or things like particular member pricing. Now, one thing that is not covered in the NOP Commerce example is that of conditions. And so there are a number of placeholders around storing the ability to have conditions affecting the final price. So those would be things like grouping. For example, if you have 5 items, you might get free shipping. And so in this case, we have conditions that essentially allow you to store placeholder values. There's no calculation represented in Commerce Connect. It's really just the ability to have conditional pricing coming from that e-commerce system and a way to access that conditional pricing from the API. You still would need to build in the logic in order to enforce that condition. But it is an important concept, which is why I mention it here. So now that we've covered price, I'm going to spend a few minutes on inventory. Now, unlike the price example, I'm not going to go through the entire chain for inventory, looking at the pipeline, looking at the exact code on the back end, because functionally they're very similar. Both price and inventory do generally, by default, require live calls to that external e-commerce system, and so it's really not worth going through that avenue again. However, I will spend a few minutes looking at the entity model for inventory concepts. And so in our NOP Commerce example, we really have a very simple inventory model. We're essentially just using stock status, so whether something's in stock or out of stock. And that's about the level of complexity that the example products on the NOP Commerce side have. However, the model itself can get extremely complex. A few things to point out here. So we have stock status. We also have orderable information. So when that product will be back in stock, if there's a shipping date for when that comes, remaining quantity. We also have stock information for locations. So, this may be specific to locations. Some locations may have something, some locations may not have something. So again, much like the conditions in the pricing model, this is something that the model can handle a lot of those complex situations and scenarios. So, locations, whether something's back orderable, whether something's pre-orderable, dates around those, counts, locations. I keep saying locations. The model itself is quite complex. Your implementation may not need all those things. And so in that case, you won't be using some aspects of the model. And again, This is one of those things where the API can store that information, but in a lot of cases, you'll be writing logic on either the front end or business rules to be able to handle how that's displayed and how that's handled with passing that information back to your backend e-commerce system. So that concludes the video on pricing and inventory calls, which again were put together in this video because of the real-time and similar nature of those two calls and functions.